and welcome back. Hello, welcome to the first lesson in the series of 10. Hello, this is the first lesson in the practical tips on how to take your IELTS test. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to take Hello, welcome to the first lesson out of 10 tips on how to take your academic IELTS test, and not only academic IELTS. You can use it if you're going to take general IELTS as well. We're going to talk about doing the tasks in the listening and reading section. And we will particularly focus on one specific type of task, which is a gap fill task. So, let's begin with the reading section. You know that for the IELTS reading task, you only have an hour. There are usually 3 passages, 3 sections. There can be more than one passage. And you need to answer all the questions. If you're taking an academic IELTS, these are going to be complex texts, and I have a specific lesson on how to prepare yourself for these kind of tasks and this kind of texts and how to increase your chances on getting a higher score. But right now, let's focus on the tasks and how to complete them. So, tip number 1 to remember: when completing reading task, you should start with the task, not the text. Because you only have an hour, you will not manage to read all the passages and all the texts. What you really need is find the answers. I personally have completed multiple IELTS tests and I scored very high, 7.5 and higher on them. But I don't even know what those texts were about. But I managed to find all the answers. Now let's have a look at how exactly we do that. So first, you need to know that there are several types and several reading skills. There is skimming, and there is scanning, and there is reading for detail, and there are some more. I'm not gonna tell you about all of them. In order to complete your IELTS reading tasks successfully, you need the first 3: skimming, scanning, and reading for detail. What is skimming? Skimming is when you quickly go through the text just to get the main idea. And if you can't just run with your eyes through the text, then just reading the first and last sentence in each paragraph will be enough for you to understand what the text is about and in what sections you can find the information that you need. Once you're done skimming, go to your first task. Go to your first reading task. Read it. Underline the keywords and try to guess the answer. I come back to this a bit later. So once you've gone through the questions, you go back to the text, look for the key words. This is where scanning comes into the game. Scanning is when you quickly go through the text again with your eyes, trying to find a specific word, a specific number. Imagine yourself being at the airport and trying to find when your flight is going to be. You don't read all the destinations on the screen, do you? You just look for the first letters. If you find the first letter, then you go on reading until you find what you need. So, let me say it again. You skim the text to see what the text is about and in what sections you might be able to find the answers that you need. Then you go to your first set of questions, underline the keywords, scan the text for the keywords, and try to find your answer. And so, section by section, all you do is you go and look for the answers to specific questions. You do not need to read all the text from beginning till the end. There are going to be also questions for which you need to read a specific section of the text in detail. But it doesn't mean that you need to spend all of your time on all of the text. Another tip about taking the reading section. If the score that you require for IELTS is between 5.5 and 6.5, what you can do is actually focus on the first two sections, read it carefully, make sure you get all the answers right, and then you can simply try and guess. If you have multiple choice questions and things like that, you can simply try and guess the answers for the third section, and this alone can bring you a band score of 6 on your reading section. This is possible. I would definitely recommend reading all the sections, doing skimming and scanning and finding the answers, and skimming and scanning will save you time. But if you think you don't have time to develop those skills and you need between 5 to 6.5, this alternative strategy might also work for you. Now let's talk about gap-fill tasks. Gap-fill tasks are the ones in which you need to write the missing word. You have them both in listening and in reading sections. In reading sections, that might be a summary task, and also in the listening section, it's usually in section 3 of the listening test. But let's talk about the gap-fill tasks for particularly the listening section. I have a very good tip for you, which has worked for me and keeps working for my students. The thing is that during the listening task and just during the test, you are stressed. Again, I have a separate tip, a separate lesson on how we can overcome this stress and how we can deal with it. But let's take it for granted that you will be stressed during the exam. And when you're stressed, it's very hard for your brain to focus. And the tricky thing about listening is that you just blink an eye, you think about a word, and the listening is gone, and you can't bring it back because you only hear it once. A great way to deal with this is the following. Before you hear the recording, you are given some time to go over that particular section. And what you need to do when you go over that section is try to guess the answers. Ask me why. Because when you're stressed, there is a high possibility of you just going over the text with your eyes, reading it, but not taking a word of it. However, when you try to guess the answer, this triggers your brain and it makes your brain focus on the text. In this case, you actually do understand what the text is about, and you understand what kind of things you need to listen for. What kind of things do you need to hear? So let's say the text goes like, in 2019, Mr. Smith went to Gap. You know that. Went to, and you try to guess. Is it a country? It's some sort of destination. Probably a noun. Maybe even a name. So you already know, and I recommend writing it right there. You will not copy it into your answer sheet, but you can write it on your test, on your exam paper, right? Let's say in 2019 or whatever I said, Mr. Smith went to, and you can write, for example, China. Then when you listen to the text, you already know what kind of things there might be, and you are prepared and you have focused on it. The same goes for the summary tasks, when you need to write the summary. In this case, you don't need it, you don't hear it word for word, but when you try to guess, you already know what kind of word you need there. Do you need a noun? Do you need an adjective? Do you need a verb? And so when the time comes, you already know what kind of word fits in there. Of course, it is also very important and very useful for these types of tasks to learn collocations, to learn the words that go with each other and also the prepositions. For this, you need to use the right resources. Again, I have a separate lesson on the resources that you may and can and should use to improve your vocabulary and grammar and general knowledge and understanding for your IELTS test in order to score high on it. So let's summarize. In this lesson, we looked into the way we can complete the tasks in the reading and listening sections of your IELTS examination. The important thing to remember about the reading section is that you do not need, and neither should you, read all the text in details. Your task is to find the answers. So you start with skimming, just read the first and last sentence in each paragraph. Understand what the text is about. Then go to your first set of questions. Underline the keywords. Start scanning the text for the keywords to find your answers. Please be very, very attentive about your spelling, because if you get the answer right, but you misspell the word, you're not going to get a point for that. When it comes to gap-fill tasks, especially in the listening section, use the time you have before you hear the recording. Go over the sentences. Try to guess the answer. Write the answer next to it, not in the gap, but just next to it. In this way, you will help your brain to focus on the task and know what it should listen for, what it should try and hear. This was all for this lesson. In further lessons, we will cover all the things I've mentioned here, the resources you can use to enrich your vocabulary and grammar and general knowledge of the examination.